China has threatened to invade Taiwan. Taiwan has been preparing, but is Taiwan ready? Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell, and this episode has been sponsored by Surfshark. Because you should be protecting your identity whenever you go online by using a VPN like Surfshark. Taiwan, a thriving democracy of 24 million people, home of the Freedom Pineapple, and the hottest flashpoint of 2021. For years, experts have called Taiwan the likeliest flashpoint that would trigger World War III. That's because of the Chinese Communist Party's plan for Taiwan unification, which is just a nicer way of saying invasion. But a Chinese communist takeover of Taiwan would also endanger the rest of the world. Taiwan is part of the first island chain in the Pacific, along with Japan and the Philippines. The Chinese Communist Party is already claiming the bottom part of the first island chain, with their 9-dash line in the South China Sea. If they got Taiwan too, that would consolidate their power over much of Asia, and would also be a launching point for them to threaten the rest of the Pacific, including U.S. allies like Japan, the Philippines, and Australia, and U.S. territories like Guam, even Hawaii. That's a big reason why the Pentagon should focus on Taiwan. But the U.S. doesn't have an official defense treaty with Taiwan. That means if the Chinese Communist Party actually invaded Taiwan, the U.S. isn't required by law to defend Taiwan. That doesn't mean the U.S. wouldn't defend Taiwan, it just means it's not guaranteed. However, the U.S. is required by law to provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive character, enough to enable Taiwan to maintain a sufficient self-defense capability. In 2020 alone, U.S. arms sales to Taiwan totaled $5 billion. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party has warned the Biden administration to stop doing this, or doing anything to support Taiwan. But other than throwing hissy fits at the U.S., the Chinese Communist Party doesn't have a lot of options for how it can take over Taiwan. It could move decisively to a full-scale invasion to raise the cost of U.S. intervention. It's possible the Biden administration would then decide it's not worth sending U.S. troops to defend Taiwan. This is a risky move, though. We've talked before about how difficult it would be to launch a full-scale invasion of Taiwan. The Chinese regime could also adopt a coercive strategy that gradually increases military pressure to bend Taipei to China's demands. This idea of gradual escalation is what many people call gray zone warfare. We did an episode about how the Chinese regime is using gray zone warfare against Taiwan, by constantly sending warplanes into Taiwan's airspace. This can ensure that China always maintains the initiative, keeping Taiwan on edge constantly, without going into full-scale conflict. This war of attrition is already wearing down Taiwan, politically, militarily, and psychologically. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to make their aggression and militarization the norm, something that is not worthy of any sort of response from other nations. So if other countries won't respond to the Chinese Communist Party's actions, is Taiwan's military prepared for a Chinese invasion? I'll get to that after the break. Welcome back. So is Taiwan's military prepared for an invasion? Taiwan has its eyes on increasing its conventional weapon capabilities. But many experts say that Taiwan should stop spending its money on them. That's because those systems are expensive and not necessarily useful for the type of warfare that Taiwan would face from the Communist Party. This is why, a couple of years ago, former Taiwanese Admiral Li Shiming proposed what's called the Overall Defense Concept, or ODC for short. The ODC is Taiwan's current strategy for dealing with a potential Chinese invasion in a resource-constrained environment. Instead of a traditional war of attrition, the ODC redefines winning war against China as foiling the People's Liberation Army's mission of successfully invading and exerting political control over Taiwan. Admiral Lee says Taiwan should prepare to absorb missile and airstrikes and preserve the ability to strike back. The ability to strike back would rely on an abundance of small, cheap weapons like mobile anti-ship missiles, portable anti-aircraft missiles, advanced sea mines, and fast missile boats. What's great about these weapons is that they can be camouflaged and dispersed in urban, coastal, jungle, and mountainous areas. This makes it hard for the PLA to search and destroy. The ODC is an approach that Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen supports. There are, however, some bureaucratic challenges that Taiwan faces in implementing the ODC. Efforts at defense reform face obstacles from institutional opposition from senior officers and a lack of time. On top of that, there's also the issue of Taiwan's military readiness. Taiwan is suffering a serious and worsening decay in the readiness and training of its troops, particularly its army units. Much of it is because Taiwan's mandatory military service has dramatically decreased from 1 year to 4 months. But even within those 4 months, some Army conscripts say they only fire 30 to 40 rounds with their rifles. That's not a lot. One Army conscript said he wasn't even taught how to clear his rifle if it jammed. Not even a fraction of conscripts get the chance to practice shooting anti-tank missiles and grenade launchers. So they miss all the fun parts. This is a problem, because a military is only as good as its soldiers. What good is buying weapons if your soldiers aren't trained to use them properly? The Tsai administration is trying to correct these issues with a mobilization office. Its goal is to better strengthen and coordinate Taiwan's reserve forces, so that reserve soldiers play a greater role and support active duty service members. The administration will also extend post-service training for reservists from 8 years to 15 years in 2022. But are these reforms enough? I'll get to that after the break. Welcome back. Taiwan's a democracy, and as a democracy, you don't want to upset the people, especially young voters with something like mandatory military conscription. But you know what's easy to do? Rely on America. But like I said earlier in this episode, there's no guarantee that America will come through. Although if it doesn't, that would be a huge blow to America's standing in the world, not to mention our ability to counter the Chinese Communist Party. But that's a whole nother episode. The biggest problem for Taiwan is that relying on the US might be making Taiwan soft. Retired US Marine Corps Colonel Grant Newsham says that Taiwan's military has been whittled down because it's acting as if defending the country is someone else's responsibility. There is also a concern the Taiwanese might not have the will to defend against and resist the mainland. This is a problem because, as the president of the U.S.-Taiwan Business Council puts it, the problem of Taiwan's defense comes down to the space between how young Taiwan citizens feel about the island's sovereignty and what they're prepared to do about it. So how do they feel? Polls show mixed messages. According to one poll, if war were to break out between Taiwan and China, 40.9% of those surveyed said that they are willing to fight or would not object to their families' participation, while 49.1% said the opposite. So the majority of Taiwanese are not willing to fight against the Chinese regime. But another poll shows that 96% of 18 and 19-year-olds would be willing to fight, although that percentage dropped to 26% for people in their 20s, the age that would likely be sent first to the front lines. But public sentiment in Taiwan is likely to change as the Chinese Communist Party gets more aggressive. Hong Kong has already been a huge wake-up call to many Taiwanese. When faced with an existential crisis, a smaller force like Taiwan can beat a much larger foe, like China, if it has enough resolve. And Taiwan's government is proactively trying to solve their military weakness. They just need enough time. So let's hope that this retired Japanese general is wrong and China doesn't invade Taiwan by 2025. And this episode is sponsored by Surfshark. Whenever you go online, you should be using a VPN, like Surfshark, to protect your identity. Everything you do online is being tracked and logged by the websites you visit and your internet service provider, and in many cases, by the government. And if you're in an authoritarian country like China, this kind of tracking can put you at risk of surveillance and even arrest. So I recommend you use Surfshark to protect yourself online. When you use Surfshark's clean web mode, you'll be protected from trackers plus a lot of ads and malware. With one account, you can connect as many devices as you want. So try it out with a 30-day money-back guarantee. And Surfshark has a special discount for China Uncensored fans. Go to surfshark.com/uncensored and use the code uncensored to get our special deal that includes 3 extra months for free. Click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.